Welcome to the IVM Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Paodcast, presented by the Daily Pao.
This is Pranuti,
Amit,
and Purva, and we're from the dailypao.com, a city-specific food and culture site, and this is our weekly podcast, the Paodcast. Now, on this episode, we have a guest. She is Bijal Vachharajani, and we're going to be talking to her about her new book, So You Want to Know About the Environment. And this episode is an installment of The Scene, in which we talk about all things culture. So stay tuned for The Scene.
The Scene. So welcome to the podcast, Bijal. So you want to know about the environment is actually a kid's book, but I've read it and I think every adult should read it because it's, it tells you about various aspects of the environment in India. It's divided into sections like climate change, food, waste, water and wildlife. So yeah, I mean, one of the things about the book is that, well, it says it's for ages 11 and up, but it doesn't dumb down anything. It doesn't dumb down the facts. It doesn't, so was that your approach when you were writing it?
Well, I'm glad you're telling me that because I have been actually writing about children's books for a very long time. And one of the things that always stayed with me was something that Maurice Sendak once said. He said, I don't write for children. He just wrote. And I think that's what I try to do. I just try to write. Yeah. And I'm glad you think it's not dumbed down because...
I mean, you can't... I mean, there's an extent to how much you can dumb down something like, these issues, which are fairly serious issues that, affect all of us. I mean, I'd still like to read this rather than Amitabh Ghosh's The Great Derangement because while that's a much more serious, sort of look at the same topic, it's also very pessimistic, whereas yours actually tells you things that you can do. Like, each chapter sort of ends with actions that you want these kids to do.
Yes.
And so it's sort of, whether it's building awareness or actually taking steps to make sure, you're doing something about all these issues. I think that's one of the sort of, unique aspects of this book. So how did you choose with the things that you were going to write out? Because it's also very specific to India, right? It's not just about climate change in general.
Right. So basically, when I started writing the book, I knew I wanted to have science, some facts, some stories, and actions, yes. But as you can see, every action starts with this little disclaimer: to do or not to do is up to you.
So some, I'm sure the kids will do, some they may not.
Why don't you tell us what some of the actions are?
So some of the actions are you can... In the waste section, you first go and analyze your bin so you understand what kind of trash is actually going in. Because I feel a lot of the pressure on children today is constantly saying, do this, you are going to save the planet, you are our only hope and all of that. And I didn't want to do that. They have enough pressures and hey, they didn't really mess up the world. It's we grown-ups who did it. So what I wanted them to do was to observe the world around them. So they've got to do things like make up words that talk about nature, look into their bin, interview their family members and kind of understand what kind of food habits they used to have in what we call the days of yore for them and how it has changed over the years for them. So just mainly observational actions, which will be fun, I hope, for the children to do and maybe rope in some adults as well.
Yeah, because... like I said, I mean, a lot of these things, I think even adults would be good for them to read because, like you mentioned, the part about waste. I mean, and you ask people, where does something go into? Like, where, does it go into dry? Does it go into wet? Or does it go into...
yes, into other.
Other, yeah. So, stuff like batteries. Like, you don't know where does batteries go. And batteries, are extremely harmful for the environment if you just, trash them away. Now, that actually goes into other, right? Which is not, I don't think even a lot of adults know what to do with things like that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I try and curb my carbon footprint. I work from home, so that makes it much more easier. I'm vegetarian. When I go shopping... We can
say yes to the first one, but not to the second.
When I go shopping, I take my own bag and all of those little things. But ultimately, there is so much once you get into the subject that it is hard. It is very difficult.
And also, on one hand, I mean, it's great to educate kids about these things and encourage them to be mindful about the environment from a young age. But it's also sad that institutionally there's no support for this. Like segregation of waste, for example. I mean, if you segregate waste, your dry waste, it's just going to go into your wet waste once it's collected by the
Absolutely.
BMC
Yes.
as far as this city is concerned. So, I mean, it's also kind of tragic that the reality is it's quite different. So, I mean, a kid might be enthusiastic about separating waste, but ultimately it's going to end up in the same pile.
And which is what I do try and talk about that and at the end of the day, it does come down to our habits, our behavior, our attitude towards what we consume. We're constantly buying things, Earlier, we would buy a pen and we would use a refill. Now we just chuck the pen into the dustbin and that goes off into the landfill. Yeah. And it's quite scary, the numbers of pens that are lying in landfill. So just imagine how much it gathers up. So, which is why there are now 4 R's. There's reduce, reuse, recycle, but there's also refuse.
Right.
And I think that's where we can all start at some level.
Yeah. And you also talk about, while it's true that, if you depend on the BMC, it's all going to get pile into one thing, but you talk about composting, and that's something that people can do, and if a kid gives that nudge to their parent to sort of try and do that, then that's something that, they'll be a little more forced to do.
Oh, I've met amazing children who... The power of persuasion of children is amazing. I know kids who've fined their parents for carrying plastic bags for shopping. I know, in the US,
nice
children...
way to get pocket money.
I know, right? And then in the US, children have sued the federal government for climate change, denying them to the right to life and liberty. In Delhi, children have filed a petition against pollution. So, you can see that these are bright children. They are taking control in some ways.
Yeah.
Right. Bijal, tell us a bit about, your career path.
My mom's been a crazy animal lover. She's a lot of what she's imparted, I've just taken it in by osmosis. And I've started writing about children's media, the world around us in that sense, and also about environment. But then I realized that I didn't know enough about it. We were talking about that the next war will be over water. We were talking about heavy facts on parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. None of it made sense to me, and which is why I thought I needed an extra degree to actually understand some of the science behind climate change and more the social political paradigms of climate change, which is really what we are seeing unraveling around us. Yeah.
And so that's why you went off to Costa Rica.
Yes, I went for a year to study, and some of my friends from there have contributed to the book. So I have a friend from Bolivia who's actually written about how our chocolate is being threatened by climate change.
Oh no.
Yeah, I think that's
we should
one
eat
of the
less chocolate
scariest sections of the book for any kid and adult.
So Bijal, now you live in Bangalore.
That's right.
But you used to live in Bombay, and when you were in Bombay, I'm sure, like any dedicated environmentalist, you've done the tour of Bombay's ecological hotspots. So, tell us about some of your favorite green spots in the city. Like, where would you take kids in the city to sort of experience the flora and the animal life of the city?
So one of my favorite spots is definitely Sivri, which is it's a great time to go right now. The flamingos are there.
Till March, right?
Till March. Yeah. And so my social media timeline's like right now fully pink because everybody's been going there. And it's always is quite amazing. You drive down there or you walk down there, whatever. And it's just this industrial community, and then suddenly there's a sea of pink that greets you. And I don't think any child or grown-up will forget that sight.
What else apart from Shivri?
One of my favorite places is Sanjay Gandhi National Park, and when I came to Bombay first, I was in the 5th standard in like the early 90s, and everybody would poo passing, Sanjay Gandhi National Park is where we did school picnics. It's awful. And then I went with Bittu Sehgal, who I worked with at Sanctuary, and it's just so amazing. You get inside the park, and it's really, Bombay's lucky to have places like Sanjay Gandhi National Park. There's just trees, the kind of biodiversity there. It's so rare to find that in a city. So the national park is, I just get like emotional thinking about it because I love that place.
Right.
Is that where you can find the world's largest moth?
The Atlas moth, yes. I mean, I've never seen one there.
Okay.
Though I've seen a leopard at the park.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Oh, lucky you.
Not straying out of the park, I hope.
Well, he was on the buffer zone, but hey, leopards and human beings have coexisted for years.
Yeah. And, interestingly, the section that Bombay gets mentioned is the wildlife section, I suppose, for these reasons, right? But where do we score in all the other sort of aspects? How good or bad are we? Because you mentioned Bangalore, you mentioned Delhi. Delhi obviously because it's, the most polluted city.
Right. And even with trash, it ranks pretty high.
I don't think that Bombay really is as...
It's not that much better.
Not that much better, right?
I think what happens with Bombay is the sea just takes in so much. And yet I see the difference every time I come back to Bombay, and I come back quite often. But the smoke...
The smog,
Yeah, the weather app
crazy.
constantly says, Mumbai, 28 degrees smoke.
Yeah.
And that just terrifies me because that's the air we are all breathing in constantly.
And we don't have many industries in the city, so it's all vehicular pollution, most of it. It's because
vehicular, construction.
Yeah, construction, two major things that are constantly, always increasing here.
That's right. And we're just going to see more and more of that. We're not really looking at any sort of green development.
Yeah, I mean, you're just seeing trees being cut every day and, new buildings coming up, which is quite sad. And, so everybody, the book is out in stores right now. It's called So You Want to Know About the Environment. And like we said, it's for kids ages 11 up, but really anybody can read it. It's a great sort of primer on all things to do with the environment. And Bijal, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. And so that's it for this episode, and we'll be back next week. For more on what's happening in this city, read thedailypao.com. Also subscribe to our newsletter on the website. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're The Daily Pao. And you can find this podcast on the IndusVox Media SoundCloud page, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn.
If you like listening to the podcast, check out Geek Fruit. Hosted by Uber geeks Tejas Menon and Jishnu Guha, this show talks about geek culture from an Indian perspective. Star Wars, comic books, science fiction and fantasy, TV shows, and more.
Hey man, just help me out, man. I need some podcast, man. I haven't had a fix in a week. Just need some.
Don't you worry about it. I got podcast galore for you, man. Just go to ivmpodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thanks, man. I'm gonna check it out.